neighborhood organizations, and I'm representing them on the group here.
All right. This is kind of your agenda, and as you can see, we're doing this informally today. This is your organizational meeting, and I'll go ahead and flip that and kind of get into the mission. And then Janine Williams from our city attorney's office is going to come up and explain to you sunshine, public records, disclosure, and all of those things, because you're working in an official capacity now with the mayor's office in the city. The introductions were important because each one of you represents a constituency, a group. From ULI, architecture, we've got people who have served, 3 members have served on the Pier Visioning Task Force. We have a marine scientist, and Dr. Hogarth is modest. He was the past interim chancellor at USF St. Pete, and before that, the dean of marine sciences at USF. Jackie Dixon, his colleague, Dr. Jackie Dixon, is currently the dean of marine sciences at USF. She is a resident of St. Petersburg from West St. Pete. She too comes with a great deal of knowledge. So every one of you, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to serve. Thank you for your passion for the city of St. Petersburg. Thank you for your passion for the waterfront. All of us share a common goal. We're going to build a pier. And once you get into this, I don't want to direct, influence. This may be the only meeting I'll ever come to of this group. I want everything to be discussed. I want everything to be on the table. I want to find consensus amongst all of you as to 2 things. First of all, there's a campaign going on. And it's a campaign to build the lens, and there's a campaign to stop the lens and start over. So on August 27th, the people have earned their right to vote. The most important date out of all of that is August 28th. Where do we go from here? The mission of this group is really twofold. One, and this could be very short, this could just be a resolution that on August 28th, after the votes are counted, if the people decide that we are going to build this thing called the lens, that all of us in this room and the constituencies that we represent will agree to work together to build this thing called the lens, and we'll make it the destination that the people deserve. Step 2, which will take a lot more time. In the event of the defeat of the lens, what do we do? What's the rudder for the city going forward? And so that secondary mission, which is very important. One, we're going to have a pier. What is the process going to look like for the design and selection of a pier? Now, I suspect that no one in here will suggest an international design competition with a jury selection. I have a feeling. But what else is there? What other processes do we as good burgers, residents of St. Petersburg, what's our way, and what will this group recommend to design and select a pier? Because having no pier is not an option. Every one of you in here, I've heard say that. Everyone in here, it's unanimous, agrees that we will have a pier on this waterfront. We've had a 100-year tradition of having a pier. We're going to have a pier. But on August 28th, what can you recommend to me as to the process for design and selection? You are not designing anything in this group. You are, and I wouldn't ask any one of you to design anything. But what you are doing is you're coming up with a process, an inclusive process. And it could, and again, I'm not going to steer it. I'm not going to influence the decisions. I think some of you have ideas on how we can get the conceptual plans and ideas. The only thing I ask that in the, you might even write the RFP. You might suggest the RFP on what we do going forward with design and selection. The only thing I ask is that you do consider the budgetary constraints. We are under the same circumstances as the previous process, which led to the lens, which is a $50 million budget. That much is true. That much is not going to change between now and August 28th of this year or next year. So, other than that, I want you to speak freely, respectfully, provide courtesy of multiple opinions, and then see if we can have some consensus for delivering to me by August 28th a process going forward of building a pier. Again, we don't know what it's going to look like. It might look like the lens. It might be something completely different. You're not designing it. But according to the task force report, and plus you've all been tasked with your homework. Hopefully you all did your homework. I'm not going to ask specific questions. But we did ask everybody review thoroughly the Pier Visioning Task Force's reports. They did a lot of work. 3 of you were on that visioning task force. They did a lot of work. They studied designs. They studied this Navy Pier, Pier 33. I mean, all Coney Island, Atlantic. They studied all the piers, and they went through so much information as to why this was a good idea or that was a good idea. Study that, because as part of this process, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to go back to the very beginning. Their conclusions were sound. What's the process going to look like going forward? That's what I have tasked this committee to do. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank you. I know it's a big task to get to here, and I know you're going to talk a lot of, you're going to mention a lot of things, master plans and timing and all of that. Everything is on the table. So I'm looking forward to your recommendations. Lee Green was modest. He is the president of the St. Petersburg Bar Association. He has decades of experience as an attorney, as a mediator, as a citizen. And I appreciate your willingness to serve as a facilitator. It's an honor to have all of you here. Thank you for stepping up, and I'll turn it over to Janine Williams, who is also past president of the St. Petersburg Bar Association.
Beauty before age.
Hello, Rob, how are you? If you could take one and pass it around. First of all, congratulations on being appointed to the Mayor's 828 Alliance. And with such an honor comes responsibility. What's coming around to you is a memorandum on sunshine law and public records. As a member of this advisory committee, you are now subject to both the sunshine law, which is chapter 286.011 of Florida statutes, and the public records law at chapter 119. Briefly, that means that before either of you can speak to one another about anything related to the 828 Alliance Committee, or anything that could foreseeably come before this committee, you should be at a public meeting. And a public meeting under the Sunshine Law has 3 requirements. First of all, it must be noticed, it must be held in a place open to the public, and third, minutes must be taken. You have a staff member here that takes care of that for you. As far as the minutes that are taken, your meetings will be noticed to the public. It's your responsibility to make sure that other meetings do not occur. Other meetings can happen in a lot of ways. The courts have broadly construed the word meeting, and the Attorney General has as well. So a meeting isn't just having a face-to-face conversation with another member of the Alliance. That also includes telephone conversation. It includes emails. I think email is probably the worst offender in the state of Florida, because people think that if I don't send it to someone, then I'm not violating the law. But what can happen is if you send it to someone who sends sends it to someone else, then under certain circumstances, that can be a meeting under the Sunshine Law. So you have to be very careful about who you are sending out information to and whether that information can be forwarded. The other vice of email is the blind copy, and the copy for that matter. Because if you send out an email and you copy another member of the alliance about alliance business, that could be considered a violation of the Sunshine Law. Now, I'm known as the doom and gloom person around here because of my Sunshine Law, public records, and public ethics talks, but it's very important, especially as a lay member of an alliance like this, that you make sure that you read the memo, keep up to date on the latest and greatest as far as public records and Sunshine Law is concerned, because those type of meetings could get you and the city in trouble. Another vice is text messages. Text messages are public records, and I'll talk about public records in a minute, but sending a text from one alliance member to the other is considered a meeting under the Sunshine Law. So basically, just don't talk to anyone else on the Alliance Committee about Alliance Committee business or something that could come before the committee as business. I'm not telling you not to have lunch with each other, but you should not speak about Alliance business at all. And as a mayor's advisory committee, I will tell you that you would want to avoid the appearance of impropriety, which may not be a technical violation, but may land you in a story by one of the wonderful persons in the room. So it's important to not only think about what is certainly a violation, but what could be an appearance of impropriety. And again, I'm not telling you can't speak with each other about your son or your daughter or anything else, but it's important that you remember that those conversations about the Pier, the lens, anything else that may come before this committee should only happen at a publicly noticed meeting held in a public area where minutes can be taken by a member of the staff that we provide to you. Do you have any questions? Yes.
The lens, I understand the lens, but there's a lot of discussion going on about the waterfront master plan, which naturally is going to incorporate the lens. The chamber has a whole committee putting together a waterfront master plan. If one of us should talk to that committee just about waterfront and lens extension, what are the limits with regard to conversations? Because that could bring up the lens, and something that you said, there could be two of us there at that same meeting. How do we handle that?
That is a good question. You're not prohibited from attending the meeting, but I would advise you not to speak at these meetings. Because if you speak about the waterfront plan and that becomes a part of the alliance business, what exactly how does this incorporate to the waterfront plan, and she's sitting there, then you've communicated. And that more than likely would be held to be a meeting in violation of the Sunshine Law.
It'll be easier for some of the other people to be rough, the lawyer not speaks rough. That's very nice.
And I knew the lawyer would have those questions,
Yeah.
because I would.
Same kind of question.
Yes.
I know some of us are on the master plan committee with the Chamber of Commerce, and we're participants in that committee, task force. So how do we handle that? We just zip our lips at these meetings?
That would be my advice, because it is more than likely that you are going to talk about the waterfront plan as a part of this concept.
But Phil, only if another member's there, right?
Right.
In other
Absolutely.
words, if you're the only one there on this,
Yeah.
but if one of you weren't there, you could speak freely, it seems to me.
Okay. And by the same time, you would talk to anyone else about it?
Right. And that includes staff members. If you have questions about Sunshine and Public Records Law, you can talk to me, as long as it's not another member of the Alliance Committee, then you're fine.
You couldn't sit
Now-
there and speak like to this person with that person sitting there.
You are right on target. That was my now.
That's the
Now,
problem,
what
yeah.
you can't do is use someone as a conduit. You can't just talk to me about something and say, by the way, please run that past another Alliance
It's the
Committee
same
member.
thing as well.
That's the same thing as a meeting. And you can't use staff as a conduit. You can't use anyone as a conduit to talk between people. By the same token, if you are going to present something to the committee in writing, that needs to come to the committee at a public meeting, because it's basically an invitation for a meeting. Because if another member wrote something in response to what you've written, the courts have considered that to be a meeting. One memo comes out, another memo comes out, which appears to be at least answering the other memo, then the two memos have met. And the two memo writers may be in violation of the Sunshine Law.
Sorry, Ms. Williams, if we have a question, can we call you?
Absolutely, that's the last sentence on here has my phone number, the office phone number on here, about questions about anything, Sunshine Law, ethics, public records. Those are the basics of the Sunshine Law. I've only been given a brief bit of time to talk to you. I speak to lawyers about this the whole day.
And I can't speak to any of my friends that, for instance, work for the city in any way, like if you're on council or mayor's office or any of that, I can't discuss any of this with them,
You
right?
can discuss it with other members of.
I can
the
discuss it then
alliance.
as long as they're not around.
Right,
Okay, gotcha, I just want to be clear on that. So
Absolutely.
I feel like I should carry around some duct tape just
and
in
I'm
case.
glad you said that, because, you know, you can't, if Rob is sitting next to you and your friend is here, don't talk about it in Rob's
I
earshot.
got it, I figured it out.
Well, just in the interest of disclosure, I chair the peer review committee and the waterfront plan committee for the council and their organizations.
Okay.
There is nobody else on this alliance that is a member of that. I'm here who's a member of that, but I am the chair of it.
So that's a notice to you. You will be there.
I've got this foundation started for the waterfront parks, and Will is on that advisory group. We're going to have a meeting before the 28th. What do you go about that? Because we're going to be talking about
Is this a foundation to raise money about waterfront?
raise money
About
for the
waterfront.
waterfront.
And we may need to speak about that, you know, offline, because as long as
It
it's
doesn't pertain to what we're
pertain to
talking
what you will talk about here, if it foreseeably could talk about here, may be okay. And for some of the other ones that are grimacing in here that are on two committees, give me a call and we can talk about it individually, about what you should do about those committees. But do give me a call if you're uncertain. Don't.
I'll be happy not to come to that meeting.
I wanted to join that
Committee's going to be-
Mr. Graham.
Just send a
about.
check.
Myself.
Mr. Graham, I wanted to join that, you and I will talk later.
After talking. Okay.
We'll talk about our family cemetery, never mind.
All right, and then as far as public records are concerned, any note, email, material, anything that refers to or is in relation to Alliance business, in most cases will be a public record. And if it's not a public record, we need to make that determination. And therefore, has to be saved, and even before it's destroyed, has to be destroyed in a certain manner according to the general record schedules that have been developed for the public records law. Now, the question I always get is, what if I'm making a note to myself? Is that a public record? Most times, not. If it is just a note to remind you of what's going on. Now, if for whatever reason that note becomes something that you share with another Alliance Committee member at the meeting, then it is a public record. Because once you have made it a record that communicates knowledge, formalizes knowledge about Alliance Committee business, then it becomes a public record. Likewise, any emails that you receive will be about Alliance Committee business will be public records. You'll see in the memo that we advise that you forward such emails to the city clerk so that there is an official copy for public records, and then we can make sure we have a record copy, and then we'll make sure that they're destroyed in accordance with the general record schedule. Yes.
So somebody emails me and says, I see you're on that committee, you know, I wish you guys would put a bucket out there.
Absolutely.
I need to forward that to you.
You need to forward it to Eva. I'm Buhar, and her email address is on the back page of this memo. That's our city clerk.
We know her.
Question?
Is that meeting today, or have we gotten those since the announcement?
If you've received them since the announcement was made, my advice would be to deal with those.
And where is the line that we stand in to turn ourselves into the state's attorney right now? Because it's so easy to violate, we just turn ourselves in.
Yeah, let's
Comes
waste the
first.
time.
If you, like, if I've talked to some of the faculty in College Green side, they're not on this alliance, and and I send them an email saying, can we meet Thursday at 2 o'clock? That has to come over here. If it's only people that are not on this alliance that want to sit down and talk about it, that
The key
emails
is-
still have to come here?
The key is the substance must relate to official business of the committee. If you're just saying, I want to meet you at 2 o'clock, that's what we call transitory, not really a public record because there's no real substance there. If there's information that is the general business of the committee or could foreseeably come before the committee, then you'll need to save it as a public record. And again, if you have any question as to whether or not something is or isn't, please give us a call. That's why we're here, to help you with those decisions.
Now, what about once he gets to that meeting? So he's a good example. So he sends out a meeting to all the people in the Ocean Group, and they talk about, he says, listen, I think what we need to do is make sure that there's something represented by us on the waterfront. Is that email that I just stated, talk about something on the waterfront, is that something that needs to be filed? And then if they all go there and they spend 2 hours talking about it, anything have to be done with that?
No, as long as none of you are there as well.
Okay.
You can speak to a body of people to bring back information to the committee. The only time the meeting, sunshine law applies to a meeting is in relation to other members of the Alliance Committee.
But that email would have been.
Right. Any record, I should say it that way, any record of the official business of the committee or could be related to the official business of the committee. And record could be email, could be text, could be a document, any record. Public records law, electronic records, paper records, everything is.
For us to do our job right, we should be talking to the people in this community.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's why
that's
I'm trying to figure out when you're filing it and when you're not filing it, because we need to know what the community wants, that's our job. And that you're representing certain
Your
groups.
point, if we
Already
can't
had
talk to people as long as they know
Yeah.
what on this
Yeah, exactly.
Right. You can't talk to this person,
So I
just
see no
not to
problem.
other members of the committee. And on the public records, I just wanted to make sure I touched on everything that I wanted to touch on here. I think I did. Are there any other questions about public records?
I have a question, if that's allowed. Is there any requirement for public input at any committee meetings? I know there were some law changes proposed. If you could clear that up, because I'm sure some people like me want to speak maybe before or after a committee meeting at some point. My name's Leonard Schmiege, by the way.
There is a law that is in effect in October 1, and we will advise you at your next meeting. There are two schools of thought on what that applies to, and our legal department is currently looking at whether this committee and other advisory committees will be subject to that. If our legal department and John Wolf as our city attorney determines that that applies to all advisory committees, then each advisory committee, including this committee, would take public comment with reasonable rules and restrictions.
How about now?
The law is not in effect until October 1.
So we can go ahead and take questions now or not?
Well, that's
Up
at
to
the
the
discretion of the committee.
Oh,
You
up
could
to the
always
committee.
take questions. The
Okay.
question was whether there's a requirement to do so. You
Okay.
could do so. We have committees right now.
So
that
we
take
can have public
comment.
input
Absolutely,
at the meeting.
absolutely.
Got it now.
Yeah, Janine, if you don't mind my jumping in, part of the idea of today is the basic organization. And you ask a good question. Okay, that's something that's got to be considered by this group, and it has not been. Literally, again, together the first time today, and all that sort of thing's got to be thought through, but I do note the task force spent approximately 14 months, had some 63 meetings. But that doesn't mean we're where we need to be. And so this group, I think, will take that up. And maybe one of the things you all consider, decide what to do.
Any other questions?
This is time for me. All right, let me just go in with this, and thank you, Janine. Chris, I think you came in late. Did you introduce yourself?
No, I haven't. Chris Steiner, President of St. Pete Chamber.
Okay, appreciate him being here. Just so everybody understands, nice thing about what I'm doing is A, I don't have a vote, and B, I'm not a member of this alliance. I'm hopefully a resource. I'll have a chance to work with all of you, and I want to build for a moment on what the point, Fred, you made just a couple of minutes ago. Because when the mayor talked about putting this together, one thing he emphasized when he and I talked is what we're all looking for. I think I've had a chance to chat with each one of you individually, is a community buy-in. And you can't get a community buy-in without the kind of outreach and conversation you're talking about. So thanks for raising it. Yes, Bob? Got something?
No.
I thought just itching your head or something. All
Not
right,
into my head, I'm not writing anything down.
just keep wearing your shorts and be comfortable.
There you go.
All right, there is a special thanks the mayor asked me to make today, and I'm not going to go around the room because I've got a bunch of friends here and bore everybody with it, but one that isn't boring is a great friend of many of ours, Randy Whitting, who chaired this task force, and June is kind enough to be with us today, and longtime friends, June and Randy, and hell, Randy and I go back to bachelor days at Bayfront Towers. That's pretty bad. But he's a greatly missed, wonderful person, excellent mayor, and did a heck of a job with his task force. And again, like the mayor, I want to thank the three people that were on it, all of whom we're lucky to have in this deal. By the way, when I'm sort of studying up this, I looked up the word, you turn to Webster's every once in a while, iconic, and I found that sort of interesting. I don't know if anybody ever looked it up. It's an image that's done in the fixed or conventional style. I thought that was an interesting definition. And talk about interesting, there are two other things I want to make, and then it's not going to go beyond this. This is not an endorsement of any sort of anybody's position. I have no position, I'm not going to take a position on the lens up or down or anything like that. But from a citizen standpoint, the work that Bill Ballard and Bud Risser have been doing, along with the chamber work with our friends here with the chamber, is much appreciated. We all want the same result, which is a beer we can be proud of going forward. Now, along those lines, when the mayor was talking, he stressed that what we want to do is create this alliance to set a tone and an underlying vision for the beer. Again, we ain't designer, you're not. We're trying to look at how to do it where there's community buy-in into the process and it's fair. Well, to do some of this, we ought to talk today, seems to me, about schedule. And there's two different tranches of scheduling. There's now and August 27th, which seems to be largely organizational. How are we going to go about this? How are we going to organize a little bit? And then if, depending on what happens on the referendum, there may be a whole lot to do following August 28th, and that's a different timeline. Within the timelines, knowing that we've got a fairly large group here, I wanted to get some feedback of how often you all think we need to meet. When you're thinking about it, let me share with you what I picked up out of this task force report. I have studied it and outlined, but I don't know a tenth of what the people who are on it know. But one thing that leapt out at me is if we had a contract today signed, we've got everything rolling, we're 3 years away from opening something, okay? It just appears to be factual. And in conversations with a number of you, it's made the suggestion, maybe a place to start is let's see if we can agree on a few facts. Let's get our fact pattern straight. Then see if we can apply those facts to what a fair process might be. So that result in this community buy-in that we're all seeking. But a schedule between now and then. For example, we've got, we're in July right now, we've got about 6 weeks or whatever the heck it is before this vote. You think we ought to have 2 or 3 meetings before the vote? something like that. Does that seem to make sense?
At least.
We want to be prepared on the
All right, well,
28th.
Yeah, so, all right. Well, what if I tried to set up, and by the way, office isn't a very big office, but we're going to sort of, I guess, be staff to the project. Hopefully get some help from someone else at some stage, but we'll do it. What I'm going to try and do then is circulate and see if there is a, more or less a consensus to maybe every 2 weeks to get together. Everybody is not going to be conceivably able to be there for all of these things. We all know the summer schedules, people have all kind of commitments. But to keep the process moving, does that seem like a reasonable start?
And
All right,
can we do phone in?
Conference.
Very good question. I think we need to also see locations. Is this location acceptable to folks?
We'll have a bigger, we'll use the other one.
Yeah, we might
We'll make
need a
sure that
larger room.
We have a larger room next.
Yeah, because you might have a number of people that wish to attend from the public standpoint. We want to make sure they can.
And then I'll jump in on that point.
Please.
Because under the sunshine law, you can't have persons participate by phone. However, a quorum does have to be present in the room in order for there to be.
You said you can.
Can't.
Can.
You can participate by phone.
Assuming there is a
But there
quorum.
has to be a
And
quorum
a quorum is a
physically.
majority by definition, is that correct? All right, so we're simply not going to set any meetings, we're not commitment to have a majority, but that will include phone call-ins. I really don't anticipate us having a problem. We're going to administratively need some sort of AT&T tie-in or something like that to make the thing work, so I'll call somebody Pier and I will do it, I suppose. Actually, I'll get Lane calls, I don't have these things. All right, but it seems like we have a...
Let me ask that again.
Yeah.
Can the quorum include the person on the phone?
No.
Okay,
It's
that's-
the
It has
physical,
to be present.
quorum has to be present.
but again, I would think we
Yeah, I would
shouldn't have
think
deep problems on that. One other thing that left out of me, and I think in conversation, I think you made the same point in the Lambert Advisory Report, and it's summarized at the end of the task force. They say, and I'm quoting this, the most important, and I'll get the quote, is the Pier has a drawing card for St. Petersburg. We're so well identified with it. And the part of the quote I wrote down is, quote, "The Pier in some form or fashion continue to exist." So another thing it seems we ought to be thinking about is in the interim, until such time as, for example, there's a contract, there's a determination precisely what we're doing, what should be happening. And again, those sorts of thought processes I would hope we'd be wrestling with and kicking around between now and the 28th. So when whatever happens on the 28th, we can get together on the 29th, which might be a good time, by the way, to think about scheduling something, even know what day of the week it is, to hit the ground running on the next stage. Any other ideas anybody want to toss out? You know, this is purely organizational. Yes, sir.
I would suggest that we have one this week and we have one next week. If this is more of an organizational, we try to get, then we can get one to get started, and then maybe we skip forward a little bit, but maybe we could have two in a row to get off and going, if that would.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, Fred. Getting one done this week would be a little rough, but why don't we start next week?
That's what I meant.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right, and then, all right, good.
And typically what advisory committees like this will do is go ahead and it's hard, you don't have your calendar, to try to set it now while you're all together, and then you can bring back that information as to future meetings to say the majority seems to be available on first Tuesday or whatever it is.
Well, maybe, but I'd rather not do that right now in this setting. I'd rather have a chance to chat with people and take a look at it, because I really don't know. And we got a lot of people here with some pretty serious calendar scenarios. So what I'd like to do is at least get a poll and see that we can get this quorum the next time around before we set it, if that's okay with the group. All right, let's go that route. And then, so Fred, you'd like to see one next week and one the after? All right, does that make sense? Everybody else, you guys okay with that?
I just had a question
Yes,
about
sir.
setting the meetings and how soon we have to have them announced as a public meeting.
That's
For
a good
you
question.
to-
I don't know the answer to that.
We have a weekly meeting schedule, so we like to have those on the calendar, you know, our city clerk is
At least 24.
well, we
24 hours.
usually go with a 48-hour rule, but to get it on the weekly meeting schedule, you're gonna need to give it to the clerk's office by Thursday before the next week.
So you've already said 7 or 8 meetings that notice the public. Or are we noticing the public about a meeting next week? And how much time do we have to notice the public about a meeting next week?
If you could make that decision before the week is out, it would be on the weekly meeting schedule that goes out to everyone. But we follow a general rule of 48 hours notice unless there's an emergency.
So we probably follow the same rule, and what we'll attempt to do is get enough consensus tomorrow so we can get the date set, shoot it over to you so we can get it out by the end of the day. That's right. And if y'all could be good enough to call my office back tomorrow as quickly as you can, because we're going to be juggling a few phone calls, get all this done. Anything else that you think we'll have to be bringing up organization, anybody's done?
Are we going to meet as a committee of the whole, or will we have subcommittees?
That's what seemed to me to be something for the committee itself to decide, whether or not you wanted to have subcommittees. But if you have subcommittees, for example, we've got the same Sunshine Act application, so they're going to have public notices and that sort of thing. Am I correct on that, Janine? I've exhausted my Sunshine Act. I just thought I'd take that one great legal opinion. But yeah, that's something to talk about, whether or not you do want to set up some subcommittees, and if so, what they would be, obviously.
Please?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Lee, it would seem to me that, we have a very short window. I really am concerned about every 2 weeks for a meeting. I almost think we need a meeting every week. I don't know that. We probably will get into this and find out, and change that schedule, I would guess, later.
Right.
But it seems like we've got a lot of ground to cover and a lot to do in a very short period of time. And unless you have subcommittees that can go off and do some work and come back and report.
I guess I didn't quite, I was thinking the way you're thinking, and I don't know, we need to ask the mayor again, Ben, but it seemed like the way Lee was talking about, we need to be ready to take, if it's number 2, we've got some more time to get number 2 ready after the 28th. Once we find out for sure that that's the answer, we're going to work towards that. But I mean, Lee, you sounded like on the 28th we need this committee to really work hard.
Well, I would think, depending on how the vote comes up,
Right.
we may have to work real hard.
Right.
There may be a lot to do.
Right.
And time isn't our friend. If you go back and you take a look at that task force recommendation, one of the things they had recommended is construction to start as early as possible. They referenced March of 2012. Well, obviously that ain't gonna happen, and you can't pull the rabbit out of the hat in 10 minutes here. So, Brett, you're right.
Yeah, but that's only if you inject yourself into the design and selection process, because that, to me, that's another thing.
Right, that's not.
That's what I was
That's
thinking.
another thing.
Yeah.
What I'm asking this group to do is to come up with the process for design and selection. And that may, and again, I don't want to I don't want to plant any, this isn't my idea, but, I mean, say you get, the process is, let's open it up to the city and get, or schools, or kids on a napkin, or, let's look at designs, let's look at, and then narrow, see what's visually appealing, and then, and then there's, again, I don't know what that process is gonna look like. I'm a lawyer, I don't think in terms of artistic and iconic and things like that, but just design the process. Or, you might decide, let's write the RFP for the design, or, design and selection process. Who's invited to the table? What do they present? What does it look like? Again, I don't know. But by this date, I'd like to be able to say, after the vote on the 27th, on this date, I'm going to recommend that we follow this inclusive process
That's a lot of work.
to get buy-in.
That's what I agree with Phil. I don't, 3 meetings isn't cut.
Well, let's go with
So again, just to clarify, Bill, you want a final report by the 28th?
I want to know what that process is going to look like.
We want 25 architects to submit
Exactly.
something
Yeah,
to look
some
at,
general-
and then this group's gonna have 22 people to look at those 25 things and cut it to 10 or whatever.
whatever, exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
that's all right, because we only have 6 weeks, we can do that, right?
Yeah.
This should be a breeze.
Well, let's ask another
Oh,
question,
Lord.
maybe focus us more. If we come up with a process in a month, is it fair to say that we would establish a framework
Good
that would be
idea.
further developed
Good idea.
after the 28th?
Could? Yeah, it's fair.
Right.
You got that,
When you think about
Yeah.
the details, I
That's
don't know
fair.
if the details are such that you have to
Maybe
be
cut the
comprehensive.
number of selection.
Well, just a framework, just, the preamble of what you do.
Who and what's going to manage the next process and what's it going to look like?
But let me interject and say, this is all if the referendum succeeds, right?
Right.
Because if it doesn't succeed, we're on a different path,
Right.
all of which moves the discussion
That'll
here.
save us all a lot of work.
Well, there won't be the new RFP, so hopefully we'll be working on how do we make this successful.
Yeah, I mean, you still have two things.
I think we're
to
developing
do.
two frameworks.
You do?
Yeah, one is if it's successful, and what are the general marching orders that can be developed? And the second will be, what if it fails, what is the framework to move forward?
But clearly, the more time-consuming part of this is to establish the process for essentially the RFP, if one of it
I
takes
think
place.
To get it started again.
We need to concentrate on that first, I would say.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
be
Do we
prepared
back up a
either
second
way.
in the
Yes, sir.
time, so I understand you're using RFP, but is it really RFQ?
Your definition's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your
Well, no.
definition. That's one reason you're sitting here. You're definitely better than
So it
that.
can only probably be an RFQ.
Yes, that is correct.
That's a better way of phrasing it.
They are two distinctly different things.
Very much so.
Request for qualifications is like a pre-step to actually the proposals.
Right, but typically for design, specifics on price.
Well, I think, you know, when I think of request for proposal, you're actually asking for a design. You're asking for a design. You're not asking what your qualifications are.
Well, then it goes hand in hand.
I think legal had to make a final determination. From my experience, from a design standpoint,
An RFP can include people's qualifications.
I would agree.
yeah.
Okay,
but I
so-
think
Right.
RFQ is a different
The way
request.
the way it was done, you
Use
used
that.
the RFQ process to start with.
Does all of it.
Well, I think what I have heard is that everybody seems to be in agreement we need to hit the ground pretty hard. So we're going to start with these first couple of meetings. We probably ought to set them up for every damn week. When we get together the next time, everybody bring their calendars physically.
Well, what does Wednesday look like at 3 o'clock?
Well, with a lot of people in this room, depends, some of them if they're in court, some of them if they got meetings
Well, I know,
in
but
South
I
Florida.
mean, you're gonna start bouncing around, you're gonna
Yeah,
Yeah,
have
we
the
might as
same
well
thing.
just set one and.
Middle of the week is very, very tough for me.
Middle of the week, well, Friday afternoons, a lot of people don't have set schedules. I don't know how many in this room that's true about, but a lot of people don't. You do?
This next week.
I'm out of town.
We'll try and find something
Well, let's
that
find
works for
something
most folks.
to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but next time around, we probably ought to go ahead and set the remainder between now and the 28th.
Well, what's next week?
I think we ought to try to set it next week while we
Well,
sit here.
give it a shot.
It's everybody Tuesday,
I'm out of town next week,
all week,
but I'm only here Monday.
Monday.
I'm here Monday.
I'm here Monday, gone, the rest of the week until Friday.
I'm out of town.
Would mornings be better than afternoons? No.
Really not for most.
Can I suggest maybe we go back to the 2-week frame and then we get back in 2 weeks, then we just try to snap it from there?
Well, I think the consensus around here, and with which I'm not having a vote here, seems to make a lot of sense. We don't have time to wait around here. It's just too much to do.
Right.
All right, well, just one person, but I can do, what day do you want to look at, 17th? I could do the afternoon of the 17th. How many people are available at 3 o'clock on the 17th?
Wednesday.
Is that the Wednesday again?
Yes, sir, it
Yes,
is.
the
Week from
17th
today.
at 3 o'clock.
We've got a conference in
You don't know, you're on?
this week in town.
Well, can we just have a show of hands, if you know, how many for sure could make Wednesday at 3 o'clock? Not very many. That doesn't look like it's going to be a particularly good day.
Lee, what may make sense is to email out to this group, you know,
That's
2
why I
or
didn't
3
want to
options,
try
pick
and-
the one that the most folks are at, and boom, get it done.
I think that's all we can do.
Right.
Sometimes that is helpful.
You're talking to a dinosaur. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't count
I
the
just
people
learned it,
working.
actually. Everybody can click, you put all the dates and everybody can click all the.
Please
work-
come to my office and do all of that. I have children that do these things.
Oh, what did I
Associates.
just sign up for?
Yes, sir.
With some time, I can switch things. The next couple of weeks, it's
Rough.
like next week, to switch stuff now is very difficult, because we're negotiating on the Restore Act funds with federal government, so
Sure.
I don't want to miss that. And so, that's my only problem. If you give me some time, I can go, move stuff, so if you want to settle out after next week,
All
I
right.
can do a lot more.
That would be good, and we'll do that. And again, the key to the first meeting, frankly, listening around the room, is to get a quorum. We got to have a quorum in at the meeting.
We do have the call-in option.
Well,
But
yeah,
that's-
except that doesn't count towards the quorum.
Not good, once you have.
Once we've got a quorum.
I can do next Monday or Friday.
You can do Monday or Friday.
Yeah, Monday.
You want to go for a Monday at 3
Monday's
o'clock?
good.
Well, I could do Monday at 3.
Monday at 3.
Okay.
Can we shoot for, how many folks do we have at Monday at 3?
Well, we got a quorum.
Hot damn. All right, Monday at 3.
What's that date?
Progress. All right.
Susan, what's that date?
15th.
The 15th, same time?
All right, that one worked.
This
What
may
is the
not be that
general
hard.
consensus? Is this an hour, or 2 hour, is it a 2 hour meeting, a 1 hour meeting?
I would think at least 2.
A 2 hour?
2 hour meeting.
I think you're
It's
gonna
all
need it.
years old.
Are you guys comfortable with the 2-hour schedule?
Can we
Okay.
park next door for free?
Yes.
Okay.
What's the agenda for this meeting?
Yeah, right.
That's what I wrote that
Next
behind
question.
you, Rob.
Yep.
What's the agenda?
Ready to go.
Well, what do you think the agenda should be? That's one of the jobs you got sitting here.
Part of it is organizational, or should we, this meeting, elect chairs or co-chairs? I mean, we want to
At
get
the next
moving.
meeting, that would
The
make
next
some
meeting,
sense.
that'd be one thing to elect the chairs or co-chairs.
Okay.
I think we should also set up, if there's going to be any subcommittees, and kind of set up the process and moving forward. There's a lot to talk and discuss about as to coming up with 2 different frameworks, and how we're going to approach the framework if it passes, and how we're going to approach the framework if it doesn't pass.
Public input.
I
Yeah,
elect
how-
you for chair.
How are we going to handle public input, and what meetings we'll have for public input to get everybody's input? I mean, how do we want to get community buy-in to what we're doing?
So having served on the last Pier committee meeting, having public input at every one of the 58 of 64 meetings that I was at, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but it was all we could do to get our work done in 2 hours.
Exactly.
And if you have public input at these meetings, and you're just going to have to ask everybody to spend 3.5 hours at the meeting instead of 2 hours at the meeting.
Excuse me, I think part of the problem with those public forums where we had that public input was there was nobody moderating the time that people were allowed to speak, so people could go on and on and on. So perhaps if somebody gave them like 1 minute, 2 minutes to speak, and maybe cut off, have a sign-up sheet and
We'll
say
put you
only.
in charge of that.
Well, there's another option. If I could, one quick one.
Never mind.
Now, this goes back to Joe's ancient history here, I suppose. But I was on Governor Child's transition committee way back when on social services. And one thing we did with that group, revamping HRS, I don't know how many years ago that was, is we actually set a meeting that was nothing but public input. So Bob, in other words, you set it for that purpose. And you make sure people have an opportunity to hear from everyone. You have to have some time limits or it doesn't work.
Right.
But you literally have that opportunity for anybody else that wants to get involved to have a chance to get,
If
might
we
be
can have
something to think
as
about.
many people as possible also
Those guys
email
have
their
to-
questions in advance, so we're not speaking extemporaneously on any of these subjects.
Be very
Right,
good idea.
and that repetitious.
Mine was pretty much the same as yours. You did that, or you could just say, in every other meeting, we'll set aside 30 minutes, and people sign up, and then
Right.
again,
First
they
come,
get 2
first served.
minutes, you got 30, they get 1 minute.
And I think that's, just one second, that's got a lot of merit. Again, to get the buy-in that we're all looking to achieve, it's logical that something ought to be done. Yes, sir.
I think, given the short window that we have, I would say we probably keep it to this committee and then provide in our process going forward the public input. Because we're not going to decide
Yeah,
anything.
No,
We're going to we set up a process. I don't think we need public input on the process.
No,
There's
they
enough
can
good
speak
minds
after we've done it.
and community participators here that I think would fairly come up with a good process.
I will tell you another thing. So we're going to put an outline, we're going to put something together, we're going to write it all out and hand it to them. That committee, whatever it is, and maybe some of us will be on it, they're going to move forward the way they're going to move forward. They're going to make changes and do what they need to do as they go forward. So we just need to come up with a really good outline to try to get this process started. I think that's our job.
Yeah.
Mayor?
One other question, and I think this may be helpful, and maybe not at the next meeting, but the meeting thereafter. I'd like to know what the process was followed in 67 or 68, the last time we had the pier. I don't know. I don't know
Well, I
what
was
the
on
process
that Pier
was.
task force, and it was actually, the last one I remember was somewhere in the mid-70s that Pete Dawson was chairing on Pier Park. Is that the one?
No, I'm talking
Oh, you're
about
on
before the pier was
I'm
put
sorry,
on,
for the
67 to
73.
73,
For the
right?
73.
What happened? Why did we have a 6-year period where there was no pier? Let's do some forensics. Let's not make the
That's a
same
good question.
mistakes over again. I don't know. I mean, I'm asking the question, and I'd love if somebody at the city could research that and for a meeting say, here's what happened last time. Maybe you want to follow the same process, maybe you don't.
Well, you can research it also through the Tampa Bay Times archives, it's right there. But basically, it was, they didn't vote. There was the same sort of mess that we're going through now, and that was part of why it took so long. And nobody liked Mr. Harvard's design, and, this group did, and that group didn't, and so it sat there. And I remember it very clearly, and it was very disappointing. So I hope we don't have to go through that again. But the bottom line is, back then, there was a different kind of political atmosphere, and people did not vote. The elected officials made the decision. That's why we elect officials, in my opinion. But just
I'll
my
see if we can
personal
tell
It would be nice to have a, white paper on what
That's
happened.
a very good idea.
Yeah.
Ed?
I wanted to circle back to the public input at both the Pier Advisory Task Force and the other task force that I served on, the airport task force. We set aside about 50 minutes at every meeting for public input, and we just limited it to a couple of minutes. We've got people here in the room today that came. They may want to have some comments here at the opening. I'm an advocate for having a small set of time set aside at every meeting.
I agree. I think if you don't do it, you'll be criticized for not doing it.
That's right.
Public can have some very good input on what process we
That's
should
true,
use.
too.
Well, it's the public that you're trying to please.
But you have to
Yeah.
time it, and you can't let it
Gotta be
run on
timed.
and on. And
Be
somebody
strong,
has to
be
moderate.
strong, but you give them the opportunity, but you be strong
Right.
and enforce it.
And
Anything
also,
else on this
maybe they can
subject?
turn in cards too, or whatever, if they can't speak.
Anything else on this particular subject? Yes, sir, I'll be with you just one moment. Anything else from the alliance itself? Okay, well, with that in mind, there's been a suggestion that we go ahead and have public input today. And if we do it, we'll limit it to a couple of minutes per person, if that's all right to the group. Everybody okay with that? Anybody have any big objection? Yes, sir. You're on.
My name's Leonard Schmiege, and thank you for the suggestion, Mr. Montanari. That's an excellent plan. Because public input is probably the most fundamental flaw in the Achilles heel of this process so far. I think the input can be very simple, doesn't have to be long. I think people are worried that it's going to be, 100 people lined up saying they're for or against a particular concept. You guys are right about the process. I have some ideas about the process myself, how we can use the internet, maybe poll different voters, aggregate on the record how people feel about different designs. And so I think I might want to give some input at future meetings. And it should only take a minute or two. It can be, I'd like to do this, here's my printout of my research, and that's it. You could have a rule that says, if it's the same input, you only hear from one person. There's no point in repetitive input until you get to the entire community forum where you're asking everyone to weigh in. So, and possibly if you could, I don't know if you could do it before and after, or ask the people who are there if they can wait till the end of the meeting. But either way, one or the other's excellent. If you can work that in, I highly recommend it. Thank you.
Well done, and we thank you, because you're a minute and 40 seconds. That's perfect. Well done, thanks. Anybody else would like to make any sort of comments? Yes, sir.
We're here because, you're here because of the mistakes that were made. You're here because of a lot of public discontent. From my perspective, going through the computer, getting people's opinion by computer. One, you need a computer. Two, you need to be on the internet quite often. And three, you have to navigate websites. The majority of people in this city don't have that, are not connected, don't know what they're doing. They're older. They look around and they feel disenfranchised. Don't repeat the same mistake. Right? Talk to the people through some type of common waveband. Don't use the computer just alone. You go try and divide it, or at least try and get input as widespread as you can. And the computer is one way of going at it, but not the only way. And remember that, because otherwise you're gonna end up with a lot of people that feel disenfranchised.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Hi, Robert Neff. What I'm looking for out of the committee is basically a list of requirements. What is needed? What I'm also looking for is a pier that has sustainable tourism. What I'm seeing is a lack of market research that defines the marketing personas and what do people want. We need to identify what we want, what we need, and what we can afford. But you need to have a good understanding of market research, and that's one of the committees that I would support the committee having a subcommittee to do, to understand what we want and what we can afford. Thank you.
Thanks.
Didn't the task force pretty much do that?
Well, yeah, the actual marketing entity was the Lambert Advisory.
Right, but I'm talking
Yes, but
more
I know what
more
you're
defined
talking about,
marketing
follow
research.
this.
Get some experts
And
in
it's
here.
3 years old, that sort of thing.
And I just wanted to thank our mayor for coming up with this plan, and I'd like to thank everybody for working together with us on this, and hopefully we can save our city from being without a pier. So I know which side I'm on, and
All
you
right.
guys do too, so
Good.
let's go
Yes, sir.
forward.
Ed.
Lee, I want to thank you for your leadership, and I've got just some basic questions and some things for us to consider going forward. And I've got, some questions for the mayor too, because Dave brought up a point of, what happened back in 1967. And we're going to try to get that information. There's a lot of information out there on this process. And this report that we put together, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Back to this gentleman's point back here. I printed up today, and this is right off the city's website, all the backup documents. And some of these reports are hundreds of pages long, but it was all kind of simplified and put into a report that the average person could kind of understand what we're going with here. I think it's going to be necessary for us to bring certain people in and talk to our committee on different issues. I think from like a legal point of view, what would happen if we made a recommendation that, instead of, let's say the lens doesn't pass the referendum, what if we make a recommendation that, well, we think we ought to go to the waiver? Well, what sort of legal jeopardy is that for the city? Because we have this international design company. So I'm just using that as an example, but there's a lot of other things like that I think we're going to need some legal advice, we're going to need some staff support, and we may need to get some briefings to give us some understanding of the financial aspects, not just capital costs, but also the subsidy, so that we all have kind of a basic level of knowledge before we start making decisions.
Very good point. Just on that, two things. One, we've got the resource of the city's attorneys, but I've also got, I don't want to be asking members of this task force, they have to be lawyers and have a great deal of knowledge and be giving legal opinions sitting on task force. It's the wrong thing to do. But I've got a couple of volunteer people that say what they are at the moment, but I can resource them if and when we need those sorts of opinions, and I think we can get them. And that's a good point. But whatever we do going forward, you remember, we're trying to come up with the right process.
And before we leave that, Mr. Montanari raises a great point. That's why I wrote this, staff support at will. I will avail the city staff to this committee as you see fit. I didn't make that a part of the agenda. I didn't even mention it. And as you can see, right now it's, you know, I have our wonderful clerk, you've got the mayor, and you've got our attorney. But whoever you want to invite to the table for what have they done, what do they know, whether it's the financial aspect, and we'll invite Ann to come, whether it's, you know, you want somebody else from legal, you know, whether you want Connors or Balestro, Quintana, or, again, you tell me, here's your agenda so far, we've got 3 items for the agenda. If you want to start going another, you're creating your agenda for the next meeting, but I'm not going to presuppose what you want. But you're going to tell us what you want, and I'll make sure that the staff is here to provide.
Before we go back to the lines, if I can do one thing, is there anybody else that wanted to give public input? Just want to make sure I haven't excluded somebody inadvertently. We okay with that? Bill?
I just, on the agenda, I think by next Monday, if we can, we ought to, if it's someone we think needs to come in, we ought to bring it forward so that we can get them scheduled, because it may be difficult to get some of these people to come to brief, so that should be part of the agenda for Monday is, who do we need to hear from?
Well, the other thing, true, the other thing is we don't necessarily have to have them physically there.
No.
You know, for example, scheduling X person around all of our schedules can be a little rough. But if we have a particular piece of information we need from a resource, then we could go get it and conceivably either have the person do it directly or use me or anyone else as a conduit back to this group. Yes, sir.
Lee, I had a follow-up with getting back to you. It is my understanding that we can speak to you freely about any of this, because you're moderator. Is that
Correct. I'm not a voting member. I'm not a member of the Alliance, so I'm not subject to the same application, the Sunshine Act. However, what I can't do is I cannot do 2 things. I can't talk to any 2 of you at the same time. Can't do that. And I can't be a conduit of information one to another. And I'll be corrected by legal over here if I'm saying anything wrong, and I want to be corrected. But that ever so basically is how this thing works. But like I say, I'm sort of staff, for lack of a better word, a resource, hopefully. Anything else we ought to bring up for today?
Just one last
Yes,
question. If the LINS does not go forward, since we've already spent, I think, 3 million, somewhere around there, would that come out of that $50 million budget? Right, so we aren't actually working with the we wouldn't be working with the $50.
Part of that expense,
I can't talk.
part of that expense can be attributed to
Studies.
the studies, demolition, things that we would have needed anyway.
Anyway,
So
okay.
I don't know how much of that can't be a carry forward, but we can certainly find out.
Thank you.
This is a kind of a follow-up question on that, and I was just thinking about the agenda item, the facts. Hopefully, facts can be agreed upon by this group, and, okay, if it was 50 million less 3, that leaves 47 million. So that's a fact that everybody in this committee can agree to. I think we've all read a lot of information in the paper, anecdotally and all this, about the structure itself. I'm not sure who to believe when it comes to that, and I'd like to try to drill down and get the facts.
Are you talking about the financing?
No, I'm talking about the physical structure, the structure itself. Is it salvageable? Is it going to fall down tomorrow? The facts, so that we can all have the same, be armed with the same facts as we go forward. And because I think without that, any recommendation could be flawed.
Would it be good to have staff
We have to
to
agree to believe that our city
We
officials.
got 2
Absolutely.
people going at the
Sorry.
same time. Fred, you were on, I think.
I'm trying to follow with him, and would it be good to have staff come and try to convince us that it's going to fall down or not fall down, or what's going to stay up? We've actually had some additional work done
We did
since
some
the
borings
last
on the
time.
5 caissons.
We work on
We don't have the
5.
results, but we did the study.
We did the study.
Right.
So I think maybe if we could have a 30-minute presentation on the
Okay.
existing
That'd be
pier?
very, very helpful. Anybody seem to agree?
And related to that is like the regulatory process. We've worked, DEP, the Corps of Engineers, who is it that whatever we come up with is going to have to say, yeah, that's okay, or no way, no how? I think that's important.
And that's also a key to this community buy-in, but one of my favorite sayings on that is Senator Moynihan's old one, that everybody's entitled to their own opinion, not their own facts. So if we can get it set down at the table so we all understand it, and we're communicating as we're going to be with whomever our individual constituents might be, we convey it. Yes, sir.
Another fact that is very basic and very important, and doesn't make intuitive sense. I've heard the number out there, 70 million to renovate what's out there already. That doesn't make intuitive sense, and it may very well be true, but I think one fact we need to establish is, if it's going to cost 10 million to renovate it, that's going to have a big impact on decision making as opposed to cost 100 million to renovate it.
Exactly my point.
And we need to get exactly what that will be, whether it's get an independent estimator out there or what. But,
You gotta remember, we originally started this whole process to renovate the pier. Somehow that got off track, we should know why.
Anybody have anything else before Monday's meeting? Yes, sir.
I just want to
I'll get
back on what they're saying, but maybe also ask staff as well. Some of the tidbits of information I skimmed over, a lot of these answers exist in reports that have already been prepared. And the staff come forward in their way, they could create a simplified one sheeter that they speak to permitting.
Good idea.
Speak to the summary of the peer report and call that information down so you get the highlights that will help guide us without the need of, I think, prepared to show you all the document that you can click and read.
You bring up a great point. I've read every one of those exhibits that Ed picked up a little bit ago. I've read them. I do not pretend to understand them. It's an entirely different thing.
Layman's terms.
I would like to suggest you all are getting ahead of yourselves when you are trying to establish facts about the existing pier and how and what costs should be and how that can be worked in. Speaking for myself, I will express a lack of confidence in the public statements of the city engineering staff. I have felt personally that they have been cheerleading for the Limbs and not providing council the concerns that should have been publicly aired. Therefore, I do not expect anything different to happen with this committee. I think you were formed to come up with just a process. You're not here to decide the quality or the lifespan of components of the existing pier. And I think you want to focus on a process for a committee that will have to deal with those substantive issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And again, one of the things, going back to what we want to do, there are some of these matters going to be uncontroversial. For example, we got $50 million. Okay? We don't have 51, we don't have 49, hopefully. We got 50. So if there are other matters about which people have serious questions, as you're raising, well, maybe that's not some agreed upon fact. We'll see. Logical enough to talk about it. Anything else for this group for today? Anybody? Mr. Mayor, I'm going to close it. Would you like to make any closing comments?
Well, this is your agenda. Again, you probably won't see me again, because I really want this to be unbiased. If you want staff, and if we want to start looking at facts, and that's what you kind of concluded, I'll make sure that 1, 2, or all 3 are here to answer any questions that you may have as it pertains to the condition of the existing structure. So this is your agenda. One of the things that we can also, that I also want you to think about, because as we've been going through this process, whether it was tying in the uplands or other pockets of money for marina expanse and dockage behind breakwaters, or wiki-wachi money with splash pads and things like that. There are still some things that I think as we go forward in process can still be considered. We're not developing all the way to Beach Drive or Bayshore or Upland. We're still focusing on the process over water, but think about these things. And also, I was even thinking this, kind of came to me a month or two ago, and when Ed Taranchik out of Hillsborough County announced his high-speed ferry from McDill to downtown Tampa with service to St. Petersburg. And I started recollecting all of this Tiger grant money and the opportunities for literally a landing spot for high-speed ferry and the ability to go after Tiger grants. Now, there still might be some pockets of grant monies out there, especially when you're looking at transportation components and things like that. So, again, these are all things that can be incorporated into a process. And again, I don't mean to plant seeds or anything, but there's a lot there. And all this alphabet soup here, the regulatory issues, I think that was a good point that somebody brought up. And I think you need to know, what is the impact of the FAA? Because there's an impact. You got 1836 right there. DEP, FEMA. That's something that was not discussed at the task force, that came up subsequently. And the fact that we've got to accommodate for sea level rise, we got to accommodate for the FEMA 50% rule, and that's a part of the process. So, yeah, we'll be able to answer those questions.
Mayor, one last question. Are any of the contractors still under contract if you needed to come before the committee to ask questions? Is all that on hold? Are we?
Only as it pertains to the levy. I mean, Skanska's still engaged, and at this point, so is Molson.
But the basic questions on the pier, the structure.
I think we can always get reports.
That would make some sense, but and there's some pretty complex questions, which I think a couple of people have raised, so we'll kind of see. Anything else organizationally we need to do for today?
Can I just make one suggestion? The chair of this committee has a big job to do. I don't know if it's wise to wait till Monday to elect a chair. We've been going out at this for an hour and 15 minutes today. We're talking about 2-hour meetings. I wanted to throw that out there before we adjourn about electing a chair and a vice chair today.
Well, you could elect a chair and a vice chair. You might want to think about perhaps having co-chairs. One of the threshold goals is unification, right? Unification, that's the threshold goal, or a threshold goal. Well, we basically have, there are all kind of offshoots on this, but basically there's two camps. There's one camp that thinks the limbs ought to get built to go forward. There's another camp that thinks it's a terrible idea, it shouldn't happen. I'm oversimplifying for a reason. But if we're going to have a unification as a result of this work, it would seem to me that you want fairly co-equal role for those voices, or else one side or the other may appear disenfranchised, or their own constituents may feel they're disenfranchised. Now, as I understand it from talking to each of you, nobody here is with everybody's got their own opinions on things, but the ultimate agenda is to get something with which the city will be proud, right? We'll do it tonight. So, anybody else have any thoughts on whether we should do something today, how we should do it, that sort of thing?
I think we should wait till Monday to choose. I think we should think about who we've met here and pay very good attention to what he just said as to who's on what's, I think we know pretty much, and it should be split as fair as we can make it.
I would probably prefer to do it today to get moving.
Okay.
Time is of the essence, and
All right.
I think everyone knows each other here, and the co-chairs, I think, would be fine approach to handle that. But that way, co-chairs co-chairs, now from a public records, if they talk about putting together an agenda, is that something that's a meeting, the co-chairs meet, or how does that work?
Depends on how this committee is gonna handle the agenda. If you vote on the approval of the agenda, then that's gonna be an action that you're gonna take as a committee.
It gets a little complicated, but give us some guidance, but essentially, as I understand it, is anything that's a decision of any sort falls under the act. And if you can think about anything you do doing being a decision, if it being under the act, you're probably gonna be safe. Is that fair?
Suppose one of us wants to put something on the agenda and call to the chair and say, put it on the agenda, is that a communication that?
Again, it will depend on how this committee handles the agenda. If you're going to vote on the agenda and approve the agenda as amended, then that is an official action of the committee, and therefore, you should just wait till you get to the
Shouldn't
meeting.
use you for those kinds of
You
things.
certainly can.
That makes more
Yeah,
sense.
Running through legal.
Yes,
You certainly can.
yes, very good.
And then I can map out whatever various things people want to have, and let's say we have 5 agenda items, then there's a vote, we take up 3 of them, you take up 4, you take up 5.
You can just be the chair too.
No, thank you. I'm very,
What do you need, nominations? I mean, how do we do?
well, let's first go, is the sense of the group you want to do this today.
I would vote yes.
As well.
Yeah.
All right? Well then, sure. Why not?
I'd like to nominate Fred Whaley for a co-chair or chair, however.
All right. First of all, let's see if there's a second.
Second.
All right. Now, next question is, it's a little unfair to Fred or anybody else who gets nominated that may or may not have the time to do it. So the
I
question
would like to
is,
nominate Phil Green.
all right. All right, is there a second to Mr. Graham?
I'll second that.
Sure. All right. Well, what we're getting to, and I appreciate Fred, but it really is true, because the next few weeks, whomever might be willing to do this, really is going to need to commit a lot of time, which means physically sign up for it. I am committing personally whatever is needed for the next few weeks. But I mean, whoever's going to take on this role is going to have to be rolling up their sleeves and ready to dig some dirt.
Yeah.
And I really can't do it. I just don't have time.
Fred, are you willing to do so?
Well, I am leaving on the 19th
For how long?
for
That's why I wanted to wait till
2.5
Monday.
weeks. I'm willing to put a ton into it.
I'd like to nominate this gentleman.
Do one at a time.
Yeah, why don't we, let's just.
Got a motion and a
please.
second.
Then he
Well,
said
Fred,
he didn't have time to do it.
I'm sorry. No, Fred, well, I guess the threshold question once again is, are you able and willing to commit the time? Really, you can't do much about being gone for a couple of weeks. There'll be a lot of phone conferences, I suppose, if you were to do it.
Yeah, that's how that, I
The only way
intend
you
to do
could do
that.
it.
Intend to do that. I'll be out in Utah. I intend to do that.
Well, I know you won't be skiing wrong time of the year.
No, that's for sure.
Well, you want to think on this between now and Monday?
Yeah.
Again, I don't want people unfairly sprung upon. Now, what I request is that we think about someone that was, let's call them the chamber side of life, maybe for the other co-chair. So would someone like to make any sort of nominations or consider nominations along those lines?
I would nominate Ted Montgomery.
Me too.
Well, there's a nomination and a second then, if you don't mind making that a second. Any other nominations? Hearing none, Ed, once again, not to put you on the spot, are you willing to say, yes, I will, and I got nothing else to do except fly planes with that? Or do you need some time between now and Monday to think whether or not you can make the time commitment to do this? You do bring that background with the task force and vice chair role, which will be helpful.
My only, I believe I have the time to do it. I'm scheduled to go out of town on Monday on a 3-day trip, so I can't make Monday's meeting.
Okay, well, we could fill you in on that. I mean, I'd take that responsibility to make sure you're totally updated with what happens. But are you in a position to say, yes, I'll do it, or do you have to think?
What did you decide? You're gonna think about it.
Let's think about it, don't move.
Is that legal?
My formal opinion is maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be here Monday, so we can decide.
All right, good. Well, so we got Ed in, and then Fred, if you'll give it some serious thought. And if you want, I'll give you a yell or.
We might need to chat about how we might do
Yes, sir.
that. Okay?
Maybe the logistics.
Yeah,
But
okay,
assuming the logistics could work out, we'd have a solution.
okay.
All right, anything else anybody wants to bring up?
I'm going to table those motions to the next meeting. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, ma'am. Is that all right? Thank you for doing the right thing with legal standards. We got you there. All right, are we ready to be adjourned? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for getting this put together. Appreciate it.
I'm bringing duct tape.
Duct tape, okay.
Hey there, I'm Big Joshua with the Tampa Tribune. I decided I didn't catch your name. I got your comments, but Jim Chapman.